I never really knew my grandfather because my grandfather wasn't exactly someone to know. It wasn't like the act of getting to know him would have been worthless, but it would have involved my putting in more than I ever got back, so at some point I guess I quietly resigned. It wasn't that he was cold or boring, but he was taciturn and reverent, and never spoke against anyone when he did speak, and these characteristics did not seem admirable to me as a child. I did not understand him as I do now, and thought he was disinterested in most things I had to say. In hindsight, I see that he was equally as disinterested in everything anyone had to say. I see that his face may not have even been one of disinterest at all, just his usual conversation face. I see that he might have had an interest in what all of humanity had to say, but received every part of it equanimously, with the same face that I thought should change into something more special and more engaged when I was the one speaking. I remember once, when I was in 3rd grade, he visited my school to pass out Bibles. I remember him standing in the doorway to the library, beside an open cardboard box, as my class filed into the room. I think I looked him in the eye and waved, and just as I was afraid that he wouldn't see me, he smiled, motioned, and maybe even mouthed something. And when I came out from the library with my class, he handed me a Bible just like everyone else. New Testament and Psalms, I remember. And after he died, I carried him. It was me and 5 others. One was another grandson, and I kept wondering why I was asked to do it. I remember complaining at the time because I thought it was too much for a 16-year-old. Truthfully, though, I didn't think I should carry a man I never knew down the aisle and between the pews and have my family cry and think of how special it must be for me, when I didn't know him, and it wasn't special, but was scary. My grandmother cried most and said that it was the last thing I would ever do for him, as if there had been a great precursory act that this final one would bookend. So I did it, and his weight shifted once, as we went to lift him off the altar table, and I felt all at once the incontrovertibility of my having not known him. Here we were, the closest we'd ever been, his face through an inch of wood that pressed against my left ear, and we went on through the door like dancers, and I lurched and shuffle-stepped under his weight as he went up, then down, the stairs outside the church. When I think of him now, it seems like he was congenitally, terminally directed towards something else. He whistled and fed birds and chickens and voted Democrat, but unattached, unencumbered. Everyone talks still about how he ran away from school when he was 9. He jumped out of the window and ran right down the mountain. At this point, the story's been reworked enough to where its setting is sometimes a one-room schoolhouse and sometimes a brand-new school building. Whenever it was told, always in front of my grandfather and always by someone else, he would hold his commentary and nod and smile. Then he'd always whistle something and look out the window and ask for more food from his seat at the head of the table as the conversation kept itself around him.
At the end of this year, my grandfather is giving up the apartment that he has lived in for half a century. As a child, I was always proud to share with my friends that my grandparents had 3 houses, an inconceivable number at that age. 1 in New York, 1 in Massachusetts, 1 in Florida. My grandfather already sold the giant house in Massachusetts to move into a condo, and now plans to live between there and Florida.
I am this one uncomfortable living. I am from here, from the place I sleep, where I accept my man's weaknesses, my soul's more or less as well. That is what motivates me, gives me the force to go on over there, where I do not know, but where there will be women, men on my side.
When my grandfather was younger, he wanted to be a professional musician. He wrote 2 musicals that premiered on Broadway, but were both flops. He ended up working in my great-grandmother's store, selling antique lamps, and now lives comfortably on her fortune, though he only pays a sixth of what his apartment would now cost to rent because of New York City rent control. There are more books in my grandparents' apartment than I have seen in most houses. Whenever I visit, I always take some with me. I told my grandfather once that I wanted to be a writer, but he suggested I join the State Department.
Walking, head uncovered, on the tiles of the Xanthian mosaics, I was wary of this temptation, the sophistication of my thought. Thus, in the same hour, I passed from the grotesque to the sublime king, wounded by fatigue, by the return of his victories and his fears.
My grandfather told my grandmother that I am his favorite grandson, maybe because I am the only one who asks him to take me to operas when I visit. But what use am I as a tie to the present, when everything here only reminds him of the past?
Now I clearly distinguish the scars on my face, but all the wounds of my soul, to whom could I show them? Good friends who once accepted my mourning, where are you? There, playing ancient card games, laughing, speaking, living.
My grandfather says you should only listen to classical music because there's no reason to try to imagine you can be someone other than you. He used to make shoes for people, and if the shoes broke, he would fix the shoes, or maybe he would give the people another pair if it was his fault in the first place that the people's shoes were broken. I guess you could say that my grandfather was a cobbler. The only reason I know anything about my grandfather at all is that I talk to him and he tells me all about himself. My grandfather says to me, "Find yourself a nice lady and settle down with her and cook her dinner and maybe start collecting model cars, even if that makes you feel older than you really are. Because one day you'll actually be that old, and sometimes you'll be happy and you'll think to yourself, I wish it had always been this way." His house is right next to the baseball field where the kids have baseball practices on the weekdays and games on Saturdays, and where the grown-ups have games on Sunday. Sometimes when I talk to him, I get distracted by the kids chanting their baseball chants, or I wonder why the adults just have games and don't ever practice. I don't think it's because they think they are better than the kids at baseball and stuff. I think it's because they are afraid to make mistakes in front of other people, which is something that can happen if you practice baseball outside next to my grandfather's house and some other houses. But I also don't think that the grown-ups all practice baseball by themselves in their own houses. If they did, I wonder who would get mad at them if they accidentally broke a kitchen cabinet by hitting a hard baseball hard into the kitchen.